There is a book in the Bible that begins with a scream and ends with a house. It opens in the dark. A whole people, worked down to the bone under a foreign whip. They have been slaves so long they have almost forgotten they were ever anything else. They groan. They cry out. And for 4 long centuries, it looks like the sky is empty. But here is the strange thing about this book. It is not really the story of how they got out. Getting out happens halfway through. The sea splits, the water crashes closed, and there are still 25 chapters to go. So if the Great Escape is only the middle, what is the book actually about? Most people think they already know this story. Plagues, a parted sea, a man with a staff. They think it ends at the shoreline, with a free people dancing on dry sand. But the book keeps walking, up a mountain, into a cloud, and finally into a tent. And that tent, of all things, is the whole point. The name of this book comes from a Greek word that simply means the way out. But the way out was never the destination. The destination was a person deciding to move in. Here is the promise. By the end, you will see that Exodus is not a story about escape. It is a story about a God who refused to stay far away, from slavery all the way to a people he lives among. So let me set the scene. The book opens not with a miracle, but with a quiet list of names. A family. 70 people who had once come down to Egypt to survive a famine back in the days of Joseph. But Joseph dies. The pages turn, generations pass, and the 70 become a multitude. The text almost stumbles over its own words describing it. They were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. A single family had quietly become a nation. And then comes the sentence that turns the whole book dark. There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He looks at these people, and he does not see neighbors. He sees a threat, a population too large to trust, too foreign to love. So he does what frightened power always does. He reaches for chains. He sets slave masters over them, bricks and mortar, backs bent in the sun, a whole people ground down into free labor for the empire. But something strange happens. The harder he presses, the more they grow. The book puts it like a paradox. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread. So Pharaoh escalates to something monstrous. He gives an order about the baby boys. Every son born to the Hebrews, he commands, is to be thrown into the Nile. The river of Egypt turned into a grave for a generation. This is where the book begins. Not with a triumphant God, but with a silent one, a people crying into the dark and no answer coming back. And then, at the end of chapter 2, 4 short verses change everything. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. The sky was not empty after all. It had simply been holding its breath. Which brings us to a burning bush, and a question that will echo through the rest of the Bible. A man named Moses, a fugitive shepherd hiding in the desert, sees a bush on fire. But the fire does not consume it. It just burns and does not stop. A voice tells him to take off his sandals, because the ground he is standing on is holy. And this voice says something almost unbelievable. I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them. Moses asks the obvious question. If I go to them and they ask me your name, what am I supposed to say? And out of the fire comes one of the most mysterious sentences ever spoken. I-A-M-W-H-O-I-M. Not a god of the river, not a god of the harvest, not one more idol on a crowded shelf. Simply, the one who is. The self-existing, uncreated source of everything, telling a slave people his own personal name. Later, the book underlines it. God tells Moses that the fathers had known him as God Almighty, but by this name, the Lord, he had not fully made himself known to them. A God who was always there is finally stepping out of the shadows and telling his people exactly what to call him. But Pharaoh is not impressed. "Who is the Lord," he sneers, "that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord." And that single line sets up the great contest at the heart of the book. Because this is not really a fight between two men. It is a showdown between the living God and the entire pantheon of Egypt. Remember, Egypt did not have one god. It had hundreds. A god for the river, a god for the sun, gods for cattle, for crops, for the sky, for the very air. And God says something chilling before it begins. "On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord." So read the 10 plagues not as random disasters, but as a God, by God dismantling of everything Egypt trusted to keep it safe. It starts at the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, worshipped as a god itself. Moses strikes the water, and it turns to blood. Then frogs, swarming up out of that same sacred river, until the land crawls and stinks with them, in every house, in every bed. Then gnats, rising from the dust of the ground. Then dense swarms of flies, filling the houses of the Egyptians. Then a plague on the livestock, and the sacred cattle of Egypt fall dead in the fields. Then boils, breaking out in festering sores on man and beast, until even Pharaoh's magicians cannot stand before Moses. Then hail, thunder, and fire running along the ground, the worst storm Egypt had ever seen, shattering everything left in the open. Then locusts, a living blanket that eats every green thing the hail had spared, until the land is bare. And then darkness. 3 days of a darkness so thick the text says it could be felt. A direct blow against the sun, the crown jewel of Egypt's entire religion. 9 plagues. And still, again and again, Pharaoh's heart is hard as stone. He will not let the people go. So the 10th is announced, the heaviest of them all. At midnight, every firstborn son in the land of Egypt will die. And here, the book slows almost to a stop. Because a rescue is being built inside the judgment, each Hebrew family is told to take a lamb, one without any blemish, to keep it for a few days, and then to kill it at twilight. They are to paint its blood on the 2 doorposts and across the top of their doors, a mark in red on the outside of the house, and God makes a promise about that blood. "When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will fall on you to destroy you." This is the Passover. Death moving through a whole land in the night and stopping only at the houses covered by the blood of a lamb. Inside, they eat standing up, ready to travel. Roasted lamb, bitter herbs, and bread made without yeast, because there is no time to let it rise. At midnight it comes, and a great cry rises across Egypt, for there is not a house without someone dead. And finally, in the dark, Pharaoh breaks. "Get out," he says. "Take your people, take your flocks, and be gone." So they go. About 600,000 men, the text says, besides women and children, an entire nation walking out of the only home they had ever known. The book pauses to mark the moment. The people had lived in Egypt 430 years, and on that very night, it all ended. But the story is not over, because Pharaoh changes his mind one last time and sends his chariots thundering after them, and the people find themselves trapped. The sea in front of them, the army behind them, and nowhere left to run. Then Moses stretches out his hand over the water. A strong wind blows all night long, and the sea stands up in 2 great walls. Israel walks through on dry ground, a road between towering seas. And when Egypt follows, the walls collapse, and the mightiest army on earth simply vanishes beneath the waves. On the far shore, The newly freed slaves do the first free thing they have ever done. They sing the Song of Moses. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is the emotional peak of the escape. But remember, we are only halfway through the book, because being rescued from something is not yet the same as being ready for anything. 3 days into the desert, the singing stops. The first water they find is bitter. They cannot drink it, and the grumbling begins. Then the food runs out, and they say the unthinkable. We should have died as slaves in Egypt, where at least we sat by pots of meat and had bread to eat. And here God does something tender. He does not scold them back into faith. He feeds them. Every morning the ground is covered with thin white flakes, like frost. They call it manna, which roughly means, what is it? Bread, quite literally, rained down from heaven. It tastes like wafers made with honey. And there is enough for each day, and never any more, so that they have to trust him all over again tomorrow. When they are dying of thirst, God tells Moses to strike a rock, and water pours out of solid stone, enough for a whole nation to drink. The wilderness becomes a classroom. God is teaching a nation of ex-slaves one difficult lifelong lesson, how to trust the God who set them free. And then, in the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, they arrive at the foot of a mountain called Sinai, and the whole tone of the book shifts. Because this is why God rescued them in the first place, not only to get them out of Egypt, but to bring them to himself and to make them his treasured people. The mountain is wrapped in smoke and fire. There is thunder, lightning, and the blast of a trumpet growing louder and louder until the whole camp trembles at the base of it. And out of that storm, God speaks the words we now call the 10 Commandments. But listen to how they open. Not with a command, but with a memory. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Grace comes first. The rescue comes before the rules. This is not how you earn me, God is saying. This is how you live, now that you are already mine. Then come the 10. The first 4 turn upward toward God. Have no other gods. Make no idols. Do not carry his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath and rest. And the last 6 turn sideways toward each other. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet. 10 short lines that would go on to shape the conscience of half the world. But in that moment, they are simply the terms of a marriage. Because that is what happens next. God offers Israel a covenant, a binding relationship, and the people answer back with one voice. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Moses seals it with blood, sprinkled on the altar and on the people, and the covenant is cut. They are no longer just a freed crowd. They are God's own nation. Then Moses climbs back up into the cloud to receive more, including 2 tablets of stone, written, the text says, by the very finger of God. And he is gone a long time, 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain, hidden inside the glory of God. But down below, 40 days turns out to be long enough for a freed people to completely lose their nerve. They come to Aaron, Moses' own brother, and say, "As for this Moses, we do not know what has become of him. Make us gods to go before us." And Aaron, unbelievably, agrees. He gathers their gold earrings, melts them down, and shapes the metal into the image of a calf. Then he says the words that break your heart. "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The very people God had just married are already bowing to a golden animal at the foot of his mountain, while the fire still burns at its peak. Moses comes down, sees the calf and the wild dancing, and in raw grief and anger, throws the 2 stone tablets to the ground and shatters them. The broken tablets are a picture of the broken covenant. It has all come apart only weeks after it began. And this is the true crisis of the book. Not Pharaoh, not the sea, But this, a holy God and a people who cannot stay faithful even for 40 days, can he still live among people like this? Or will he finally have to turn and walk away? Moses climbs the mountain again and pleads for them and refuses to take one more step unless God's own presence goes with them. And God, astonishingly, relents. He passes by Moses and declares who he truly is. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. He cuts the tablets a second time. He renews the covenant. Mercy, it turns out, is written even deeper into this God than judgment is. And now we reach the part of Exodus almost no one talks about, but which the book itself treats as the grand finale. For the last third of Exodus, chapter after chapter, God gives Moses a blueprint. Long, detailed instructions for building a single tent. Modern readers skim these chapters as boring, cubits and curtains and gold rings. But the ancient reader understood. This is where the whole story has been heading all along. Because God gives the reason for all of it in one breathtaking sentence. Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst. There it is. The point of the Exodus. Not just to get a people out of Egypt, but to get God back into the middle of the camp. The tent is called the Tabernacle, a word that simply means a dwelling place. A house for God, pitched right among the tents of a wandering people. And every detail matters, because every piece is a picture. At the very center, behind a heavy woven veil, sits a golden chest called the Ark of the Covenant. On its golden lid, 2 carved angels face each other, wings stretched out and overshadowing, and in the empty space between them, God promises to come down and meet with his people. Just outside the veil stands a golden lampstand, always burning, a table set with bread, a small altar where fragrant incense rises all day, like the prayers of the people, and out in the courtyard, a bronze altar for sacrifice, and a great bronze basin of water for washing. A way in, provided for people who are not yet clean enough to draw near. And here is the beautiful part. God does not simply build it himself. He invites them to build it out of the very gold and silver they had carried out of Egypt. He fills 2 craftsmen, Bezalel and Oholiab, with his own spirit to work in gold and wood and cloth and stone. The first people in the entire Bible said to be filled with the Spirit of God are artists, and the people give. So freely, so generously, that Moses eventually has to give a command telling them to stop bringing offerings, because there is already far more than enough. A people who had walked out of slavery with almost nothing now pour out their treasure to build a home for their God. And then, in the very last chapter of the book, it is finished. Every board raised, every curtain hung, every golden vessel set in its place. And this is how the entire book of Exodus ends. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. So thick, so heavy with presence, that even Moses could not enter. The God who had thundered from a distant mountaintop had come all the way down to live in the middle of the camp. Now look at the distance this book has traveled. It opened with a people so far from God, they were crying into what felt like an empty sky. And it ends with that same God tenting in their very midst, moving when they move, stopping when they stop, his glory glowing quietly at the center of the camp every single night. That is the true shape of Exodus. Not simply slavery to freedom. Freedom is only the halfway mark. The real arc is slavery, all the way to a people God comes to dwell among. Freedom, it turns out, was never the goal. Freedom was only the doorway. What God actually wanted from the very first cry in the dark was to be with them. And once you see that, you start to see it everywhere. It becomes the pattern the whole rest of the Bible will follow. A spotless lamb whose blood makes death pass over. a rescue that leads not just out of something, but home to someone. A God quietly determined to close the distance. Centuries later, a gospel writer would reach for this exact picture and say of Jesus, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." And the word he used was tabernacle, the very same idea. God pitching his tent among his people once again. The Exodus happening one more time, now in a person, in flesh and blood. So the next time someone tells you Exodus is just a story about escaping Egypt, you can smile and tell them the deeper truth. It is a story about a God who would tear an empire apart, split an entire sea, and shape both a mountain of law and a tent of gold, all for a single reason, so that he would never again have to live far from you, from slavery to a people he dwells among. That is the book of Exodus, and in a way, it is a book still being written.